You are listening to The Darker Sides of Life, a podcast by Hexekami. Welcome to another episode of The Darker Sides of Life. I'm your host Camilla, or hexekami, as you may also know me from my Instagram handle. And today's episode is dealing with another kind of loss than the one of death. It's about losing one's partner in a breakup situation. I want to begin by saying that I myself have experienced 2 breakups in my life, and especially the second one shaped me in a way that still affects me today. I want to talk about the loss of a partner in this sense because I have seen so many times how breakups can sometimes be deemed superficial in the way that others perceive how a person going through one acts and grieves. And I think that's a wrong approach. So I want to start today's episode by stepping back for a moment and looking at what I call the scale of grief. Let me explain it. The scale of grief is what I often pull out when people around me are talking about pain in a mourning kind of way. So that could be that they are, for example, saying, quote, "My friend has just lost her dog, and she talks about it and is so sad, but my cousin just died, and I think my pain is more valid than hers because my cousin was a human and my friend can just get a new dog," end quote. Or they can say something like, quote, "Well, don't be so sad because you will find a new partner. There are plenty of fish in the sea. Cheer up," end quote. So what I mean with this scale of grief is that I have seen there's a tendency to neglect others' pain if we feel we have experienced something worse ourselves. I have many times had people sort of pull back if they were telling me something from their lives that hurt them when they realized that I have lost my mother to cancer when I was 8 and that I had a horrible father. It's like they feel ashamed about their pain, as if it isn't valid enough. And so I want to begin today's episode by saying that I do not think there's a scale of grief. One cannot compare pain like this. It's not fair to the ones being compared, nor is it fair to the pain itself, because I think by doing so, comparing them that is, we fail to see the person in front of us who needs our help. So I always stop people if they compare their pain to mine and apologize for themselves because they shouldn't complain when they know I have, as they often say, had it so much worse. So yes, let's agree on the fact just now that pain is completely individual, and it is with this mindset I will go forth in talking about losing a partner to a breakup. I once read an interview online with a relationship psychologist who said that falling in love is much like getting an addiction, and thus the opposite of this scenario, which is breaking up from someone you've once been in love with, is sort of like going cold turkey, in which your brain is trying to figure out what happened to the fix it was so used to getting. Using this metaphor, I think it's fair to say that breaking up with someone can feel like a very nasty withdrawal process. The body is super confused, and I think that is why we sometimes, during breakups, can waddle between the should I go back to the relationship and the I never want to see this person again in my life. I said in the beginning that I have had 2 breakups in my life and that the latest one changed me. I don't want to share personal details about the person I was in a relationship with at the time, so I will keep things vague, but to understand why it changed me, I think I need to share a bit about the relationship itself. Back in 2013, I was struggling with my family situation like I had been all my life since my mother died. I can now see that I actually had no real grasp of who I was and what I wanted to do with my life, because I had grown so accustomed to doing what my father demanded of me. Also when I knew deep down it wasn't truly what I wanted. So I went into this particular relationship with a lack of self, which of course ultimately led to a breakup. I started dating someone, and without even realizing it, their personality became mine. I almost copied their way of living, both so I would be a better fit for this person, but also because it felt nice to have a way of being laid out to me that wasn't coming from my family. It feels horrible to say out loud now, and for a long time after the relationship ended, I felt very ashamed about it. But at the time when we were dating, it just slowly happened, and I let it because I was in such a bad state mentally. So this person was very different from me, like really different. there were the classic things that I think many people can recognize, like they enjoyed a different kind of music than I did, or they had other hobbies that I had, which in this case was playing computer games all day. And then there was the perhaps larger difference between us, which in this case was that they liked to smoke weed and drink beer with their friends. I want to say here that I am not judging people who like to smoke weed and drink beer. I have done both, and I sometimes will occasionally have a beer or two, but it has never been something I myself have done on a scale that the partner I had at this time did. So because I lacked the feeling of self, I copied my partner and started drinking beer often and also smoking weed, which was not something I naturally gravitated towards. Somewhere deep down, I could tell that the things I had started doing, such as smoking and drinking and also playing the computer game my partner liked to play, wasn't me. But I had no idea what was me, so it was such an odd state to be in, since I was sort of struggling and fighting with myself over who I wanted to be, who I thought deep inside I was, and who I was presenting as. Still, I morphed into the personality my partner had. It was like the story about the frog. The one where if you put a frog into boiling water, it will jump out immediately and flee. But if you put it in cold water and slowly turn up the heat, it won't notice, and eventually it will be boiled alive. At one point during this relationship, I think my inner struggle changed from hitting myself in the head over why I couldn't figure out who I was to realizing that part of doing that, hitting, was to say no to the things that didn't make me feel good. But that was in itself very difficult, because my partner really wanted to do the stuff that was natural to them. And so I slowly realized that the more I gravitated towards stuff that I wanted to do, and therefore less and less to what they wanted to do, the less my partner wanted to see me and spend time with me. So then came a long period of time where I would do the things I knew I didn't care for because I wanted to spend time with my partner. And that, as you probably can tell, is not a sustainable relationship foundation, so this was the beginning of the end, really. And I think this forced me to realize that the relationship was not for me. It wasn't doing me any good, and I had to stop acting like I was someone else. So we broke up. And then came the shock. Imagine, if you can, the shock my body felt when the relationship ended, because who was this person I had become, and what was I gonna do now? And whilst I should have continued to find myself and the person I wanted to be, that journey seemed so incredibly hard that I did something else, sort of the opposite, really. Instead of finding myself, I downloaded one of those dating apps because the thought of being alone and finding myself was way too much for me. I swiped yes to everyone, just so I could initiate conversations. It was not like I was looking for a new partner. I was just looking for constant stimuli to feel less alone and deal with myself. So I texted so many people at once. It became a joke amongst my friends that I was text dating more than 5 people at a time, and I just sort of laughed it off because I didn't understand my own reactions to the relationship and myself at all. It was like the shock overshadowed the feeling I had felt in the relationship about wanting to find out who I was, and I sort of forgot. Then after a while came the anger. In the beginning, I was just miserable and sad, but now I felt a glowing hatred to myself because of what I had put myself through. I would get physically sick when people would mention the relationship, and also my ex's name, and I would turn red if they tried to ask me what had happened to us. I remember a particular incident at uni when a classmate was asking me something in regards to my previous partner, and I reacted by standing up, packing on my gear, and going home for the day. The anger I had over the whole situation was just too much. So I started to try and put the anger somewhere, and thus began taking long walks around the lake I lived next to. I would do this at all times of the day, and sometimes more than once. The walk around that lake is a 11-kilometer distance, which for you Americans is around 7 miles. I just walked and walked and walked, and when I walked, I text dated all the people I found on the dating app. The stimuli really had to be constant, and if it wasn't, I found out that I went numb and stopped talking, which of course is a bad state to be in general, but especially when one is studying at uni and being very dependent on the mere fact of one's voice to discuss philosophy. I went on like this for months. Along the way, I added going out as often as I could for drinks with friends, going clubbing and dancing to think about something else. During that time, my body was healing from my time in the relationship where I didn't know who I was and I just sort of morphed into this other personality. And it was also healing from realizing that I had lost myself in the whole process. In many ways, I had spent the last 6 or 7 years trying to get myself back. And during that time, I realized that my sense of self was in many ways lost. Not because of the bad relationships, but because of the family situation, like I said in the beginning. So I started therapy. I shifted my focus from constant external stimuli to diving into my own mind and finding the reasons for why I needed those distractions all the time. So that relationship, it really did change me. There's a clear before and after for me personally. The Camilla before was sad and felt alone. She needed to be with someone else, no matter the cost, just so she wouldn't feel the pain. And the Camilla now understands that pain is not always a bad thing and that it needs to be dealt with in order to heal from it. So losing a partner can be just as life-altering as losing someone to death, especially when you lose yourself. I hope that by sharing my story, it is evident that the scale of grief is a concept we have somewhere along the lines created for no good reason. I have lost my mom to cancer, and I still felt so much pain during my breakup that I sometimes thought it would never end. So grief in this regard is surely not measurable and static. It moves with you and adapts to whatever situation you are in. And that's the reason I think we need to take it more seriously than what I have witnessed when people are going through a breakup, for example, if they say and show that they are in pain and are grieving. Because that kind of loss can be so shattering and can be so painful that those suffering from it need just as much kindness, love, and care as people who have lost someone in the more classical sense. I wonder what your thoughts are on this matter. Do you agree? Or do you differentiate how you think about loss and mourning? Is some pain and loss worse than others? And if so, why? There's no right or wrong answer here. I'm not judging anyone who thinks differently about these matters than what I do, but I'm super curious to learn and know more about how we deal with it, so I would love it if you shared your thoughts with me. You can send me an email at thedarkersidesoflife@gmail.com, or you can hit me up on my Instagram, which is at hexekami, or you can go to the Ko-fi page and share your comments and thoughts there. Next episode, I will talk about loss again, but this time it will be about the loss of a friend. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you would take a moment to share it with your friends and leave a review and rating on iTunes. It helps me reach more people, and the only thing I want is to reach those who need someone to tell them they're not alone in the darker sides of life. I also have a Ko-fi, so you can donate a few bucks there if you want to help me continue doing this kind of content. The link for that will be in the description box to this episode. Thank you for helping me and this podcast get out there. And until next time, please take care. And remember, you are never alone in the darker sides of life. You've been listening to The Darker Sides of Life, a podcast by Hexekami.